The crackle of the dispatch radio cut through the stale air of Eddie Dunn's tow truck cab like a knife through fog. He'd been nursing the same cup of lukewarm coffee for the past hour, watching the mist curl between the towering pines that lined Route 9 like sentries guarding some forgotten kingdom. "Eddie, you're up," the dispatcher's voice wheezed through static. "Got a pickup at mile marker 47. Old guy says gremlins chewed through his gas line." Eddie snorted, nearly choking on his coffee. Gremlins, huh? He keyed the mic. "Yeah, I'll take it. Well, I'll tow anything that pays mileage." He dropped the mic onto the passenger seat, where it landed among the archaeological layers of his life. Fast food wrappers, cigarette burns on the upholstery, a dog-eared paperback he'd been meaning to finish for 3 years. The only monsters on these roads were drunks and deer, and Eddie had seen enough of both to last a lifetime. As he shifted into gear, a faint metallic tapping echoed from the truck bed. Eddie's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Nothing but shadows and the occasional glint of chrome from his equipment. The sound stopped. Probably just a loose chain or a wrench rolling around back there. He made a mental note to check it later. A note his brain would probably lose somewhere between the next cigarette and the next call. Mile marker 47 materialized from the fog like a ghost. A rusted pickup sat on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly, barely visible through the soupy air. Eddie pulled up behind it, his headlights catching the silhouette of a man standing beside the truck as if he'd been waiting there for centuries. Harlan Pike looked to be pushing 80, but he stood straight as a rail fence, all wiry muscle and steady eyes. When Eddie climbed down from the cab, Harlan greeted him with a cheerful nod. "They got me again," he said like he was discussing the weather. Eddie raised an eyebrow. "The gremlins?" "Little bastards love fuel lines." Eddie couldn't help but grin. "Guess the warranty doesn't cover gremlins?" "Never does." There was something odd about the way Harlan's shadow moved, or didn't move, in the shifting beam of Eddie's flashlight. Eddie chalked it up to exhaustion and the general weirdness of the graveyard shift. He circled to the back of Harlan's pickup to hook it up. The truck bed held a jumble of objects that looked like a crow's estate sale. Washers strung on wire, beer caps hammered flat, coins glued into a rough spiral, half-burned candles melted into jar lids. Eddie had seen his share of eccentrics on Route 9, but this was a new level of pack rat peculiar. "Quite the collection," Eddie said. Harlan just smiled. As Eddie bent to secure the tow chains, Harlan spoke again. "Gremlins." The word hung in the air. At the same moment, Eddie's radio, still sitting in his truck's cab, engine off, erupted into a brief burst of white noise, then fell silent. Eddie paused, chains in hand. Coincidence? Had to be. The moment Eddie engaged the tow mechanism, his truck's headlights flickered like a dying heartbeat. The radio crackled to life, spewing nothing but static, even though the key was in Eddie's pocket. Harlan settled into the passenger seat with the calm of a man who'd seen it all before. "They don't like being ignored," he said matter-of-factly. "Who doesn't?" Eddie turned the key. The engine groaned, but wouldn't catch. "The gremlins." Eddie laughed, but it came out hollow. "Right, well, they can file a complaint with the union." The truck shuddered violently, hard enough to rattle Eddie's teeth. The headlights died completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the faint glow of the fog. In this sudden quiet, Harlan's voice was soft as falling snow. "They want an offering." "An offering? You're kidding." "Something shiny, something that matters to you." Eddie stared at the old man, then at his dashboard, then back at the old man. This was insane. But the truck wouldn't start, and they were miles from anywhere, and the fog was getting thicker, and... Fine. Eddie grabbed his keychain, the one with the little brass compass his daughter had given him for his birthday, and tossed it on the dashboard. There. Happy? The headlights blazed to life. The engine sprung to life and purred like a contented cat. Eddie's hands were shaking. Okay, that's... That's creepy. Harlan's smile was faint but unmistakable. Told you. Sweet-natured bunch once you learn the rules. Eddie put the truck in gear and pulled back onto Route 9. His daughter's keychain sat on the dashboard. He told himself it was a coincidence. Faulty wiring, a loose connection that happened to tighten up at the exact right moment. It had to be.
The road twisted through a tunnel of fog and pine. The wipers squealed across the windshield in a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. The heater groaned and rattled. Eddie muttered, "If I die of boredom out here, I'm haunting dispatch for the rest of eternity." Harlan chuckled softly. The engine coughed, then began to sputter like it was drowning. "Oh, come on." Eddie pumped the gas pedal. "Not again." "They like sweet things," Harlan said. Eddie shot him a look. "What?" "Sweet things. Sugar. Candy." Eddie dug into the back seat with one hand, fingers finding the crinkled cellophane of a half-empty pack of powdered donuts he'd bought 3 days ago and forgotten about. He shoved the package toward Harlan. "Here, breakfast of champions. You want to throw one at the engine?" Harlan took the best-looking donut in the pack and slid it gently under the front seat. "What the hell?" Eddie protested. "Powdered are their favorite." Harlan's voice was distant, almost dreamy. The engine smoothed out instantly, humming like it had just rolled off the factory floor. Eddie blinked. "You owe me a car wash," then brushed powdered sugar off the seats onto the floor, trying to ignore the cold weight settling in his stomach. Harlan wasn't joking. The old man believed every word he was saying. And worse, the universe seemed to agree with him. They drove on, and Eddie's headlights carved a narrow corridor through the darkness, revealing nothing but more road, more fog, more emptiness. The truck jerked hard to the left. The headlights flickered for a moment, then died. The engine gave one final cough and went silent. Eddie coasted to the shoulder on momentum alone, his hazard lights flashing red across his face like a warning. Perfect. A midnight breakdown in the middle of nowhere. He popped the hood and climbed out, flashlight in hand. Heat and steam rose from the engine in ghostly wisps. He checked the belts, the cables, the battery connections. Everything looked fine. Perfect, even. Harlan appeared beside him, materializing from the fog like he'd always been there. His calm was unnerving. "They're restless again," Harlan said. "Great. Greedy little bastards. Did they take cash?" He could barely believe he was negotiating with this man's imagination. "They want something that hurts." Eddie turned slowly. "Come again?" Harlan produced a pocket knife from his coat, opened it with practiced ease, and drew the blade across his palm. Blood welled up, dark in the flashlight beam. He held his hand over the warm engine and let the blood drip onto the metal. It hissed when it hit, like water on a hot pan. Eddie stepped back in shock. Nothing happened. "You're nuts, old man." Harlan's expression darkened. "They don't want me anymore." He offered Eddie the knife, handle first. "They want you." "Not a chance." Eddie started back toward the cab. That's when the noises began. Faint scratching under the engine bay. Tapping inside the door panel. A breathy giggle, high and wrong, whispering through the heating vents. Eddie froze mid-step. "You hear that?" "They're waiting," Harlan whispered. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. His skin crawled. He cursed, snatched the knife with more anger than he'd intended, and jabbed his finger with the point. Blood beaded up. He squeezed a few drops onto the engine block. The truck roared to life with such violence that Eddie stumbled backward. "That's impossible," he breathed. Harlan smiled thinly, wiping his bloody palm on his filthy jeans. "You'd be amazed what pain can fix." Eddie's voice came out shaky. "What the hell are you?" "Just a man who stopped fighting back too late for it to matter." As Eddie stared at the old man, his headlights swept across the tree line. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, he could have sworn he saw shapes darting between the trunks. Small, fast, wrong. He slammed the hood and practically dove back into the cab, heart hammering. The road felt endless. The heater hummed in an odd rhythm, almost like whispering. Eddie's eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror where he caught glimpses of movement along the tow chain, small shadows, crawling, scuttling. He pulled to the shoulder again, grabbed his flashlight and jumped out. The beam swept across the chain, the truck bed, the tree line, nothing. Just fog and darkness and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Back in the cab, Harlan's eyes had changed. They were still lucid, but wild now. Feverish. Don't look for them. They hate being seen. Eddie snapped. You ever think maybe it's not gremlins? Maybe you're just losing it? Maybe you've been driving a Route 9 too long and your brain's turned to pudding? Harlan laughed. It was a high, brittle sound, like breaking glass. Oh, it's me all right. You're not wrong about that. They don't bother just anyone. They like mechanics, pilots, fixers, the ones who keep the world running. His voice took on a sing-song quality. We're their toys. He leaned closer, and Eddie could smell coffee and cigarettes and something else, something old and sour. I've been feeding them for decades. Shiny things, sweets, blood. They always want more. But they're tired of me now. I'm worn out, used up. His grin widened, showing too many teeth. They want someone new. You've got good lungs for screaming, kid. Eddie's hands tightened on the wheel. The genial old man was gone. What sat beside him now was something else, something broken and hungry and wrong. The gas gauge slammed to empty. Eddie stared at it, mouth dry. No way! I filled the tank 4 hours ago! The truck coasted to a stop. Outside, the constant chorus of crickets and frogs cut off like someone had flipped a switch, leaving only the low tick, tick, tick of the cooling engine. Eddie gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles went white. You got any more donuts? He said, because jokes were the only thing he had left to trade that weren't made of bone. Harlan shook his head slowly. They're done with sweets. He stared into the black woods beyond the windshield. They like company. You already said that, Eddie muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. Harlan's tone softened, becoming almost paternal, gentle. They like company, Eddie, and they don't like being ignored. He opened the door. Eddie grabbed his sleeve. Where the hell are you going? Home. They've been waiting for me. Harlan stepped out into the tall grass beside the road. Eddie unbuckled his seatbelt, ready to follow, maybe to stop him, maybe to run with him or something. Harlan turned back. In the reflected glow of the hazard lights, his eyes gleamed like coins at the bottom of a well. And then he ran. Not the shuffle of an old man, not a hobble or a limp, a full sprint into the darkness, legs pumping, arms swinging. His laughter broke into a cracked, hysterical shriek that blended with the sound Eddie had never heard before. Metallic chittering, like 1,000 tiny tools scraping against each other. The sounds faded. The forest swallowed them whole. Eddie sat frozen, hands still gripping the wheel, staring at the spot where Harlan had disappeared. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Time felt strange. Finally, Eddie's breathing slowed. He climbed back into the cab, hands trembling so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned when he asked it to, eager, obedient. His headlights forced the road into being. Eddie laughed, a nervous, shaky sound. I guess they liked him better. The road unspooled behind him as gray dawn crept across the horizon.
The truck ran perfectly. Even the radio sounded normal, playing some late-night talk show about conspiracy theories and government cover-ups. Eddie exhaled slowly. See? All fine. Just me, my rig, and the world's craziest hitchhiker. He grabbed the radio. Dispatch, this is Eddie. Pickup's done. Heading in. Any trouble? Maddie smirked. Nah, just an old-timer with a sweet tooth and a loose screw. Copy that. We'll keep the donuts warm. He hung the mic on its hook, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders. The worst was over. Just another weird night on Route 9. The kind of story he'd tell over beers and nobody would ever believe. Eddie sat in his usual booth at Rosie's. Morning light spilled in through the windows, but he stared bleary-eyed into his coffee and watched the steam rise. The waitress paused at his table. You okay, hun? You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet. Eddie managed to smile. Just a long night. Lot of noise. Well, you get some rest. Can't have you falling asleep at the wheel. Outside, his tow truck gleamed under the rising sun. Eddie climbed in, fired up the engine, and pulled onto Main Street. The morning traffic was light. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. He didn't notice the faint powdered sugar handprint smeared in the corner of the windshield. Small. Clawed. Wrong. From the vents, the radio crackled. Just static at first. Then something underneath. Laughter. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that he should probably check the truck bed because he kept hearing a faint metallic tapping. But that could wait. That could always wait. After all, the only monsters on the road are drunks and deer. Weren't they? Eddie Dunn thought he'd left the night's madness behind him on Route 9. A harmless old man, a broken truck, and a few donuts gone to waste. So if you find yourself driving the long roads between dusk and dawn, listen carefully, because the things that ride with you might not like being ignored. Somewhere out there, Eddie keeps the engine running, mile after mile, in a place where the fog never quite lifts, and the gremlins are always hungry.